ні слава, ні воля, ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу.
Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі! Ворогам України тричі! Now, my friends, I'd like to reiterate once again, now that we have the aid, the technological aid here, to make our voice be heard a little bit better without having to strain it too much. I'd like to reiterate once again what we were saying a while ago. Now, Joe Rogan has shown a very unseemly opinion not too long ago. He started dropping insults, he started dropping F-bombs all over the place. Oh, F you people, F Ukraine, F you all, you're all to stop World War III. What a foolish individual, truly. And you truly think that a whole nation has nothing better to do than to wait for World War III? That's the first point. Second point. Why would somebody blame the victims of a war, the people who are getting invaded, of stopping and escalating that war? Why would anyone do that? That's like blaming the man who might be walking around the street right now and he gets attacked by some random psychopath. And people go around and say, oh no, you can't be fighting that, that's escalation. You need to allow that psychopath, excuse me. That will never happen again, I'm sure. You need to allow that psychopath to simply beat you up and kill you on the spot. I mean, who in their right mind would actually be telling that to anyone? Someone who's defending himself. Somebody's fighting for his life. And people go to him and say, no, you can't be defending yourself. Because that's escalation. Absolutely insane. However, Joe Rogan seems to think it's a good idea to blame Ukraine for this war, to blame Ukraine for the perpetual Russian escalation. How idiotic. Now, my friends, one of the points the Russians love to make is a silly generalization that they absolutely love. Oh, you know, Russia is corrupt, but look at Ukraine, it has corruption. Look at the US, they have corruption. Oh, you know, Russia did bad things, but look at the US, look at the war in Iraq. This is what we call whataboutism. They always refuse to take the minutest accountability for their crimes. And they point the fingers at others, at anyone. Most of the time, the accusations they make are absolutely ridiculous. Like the perfect accusation of Putin saying he was going to denazify Ukraine. And in the meantime, the Russian military has the Wagner Group, Rusich, and the Sparta Battalion fighting for itself. In fact, they had a bit of a problem with the Wagner Group. I'm sure you remember, my friends. When the Wagner Group decided that Putin was a little bit too mellow for them. Funny thing. And then Prigozhin marched on Moscow for a couple of days before he got cold feet and he went to Belarus. But then Prigozhin went to Africa and in the stupidest move, in this whole war, Prigozhin decided it would be a great idea to return to Russia to start recruitment again. And of course, lo and behold, Prigozhin was killed by the Russian regime. But here's the caveat. Prigozhin was a war criminal. Was he killed before because he was a war criminal? No. His war crimes were beloved by the Russian terrorist regime. They loved what he was doing when he was fully on their side, when he was committing those war crimes in the name of Putin. They loved him back then. But when Prigozhin started dropping a few inconvenient truths about the real reasons behind this war, the real reasons why the Russians started this war, why they escalated this war, why they would continue this war until the West would stop sleeping around and would finally realize that the Russian terrorist regime cannot be negotiated with, that the only way to speak with them is with force. Of course, that's what Putin is expecting. That the goldfish memory of the people in the West is simply going to forget and automatically forgive all of the crimes that Russia has committed, not only against Ukraine, but against the people of this country, against the people who live here, against the people who come here seeking refuge. Litvinenko is one of the best examples of this. An ex-KGB agent who was exposing the myriad of crimes committed by the Russian FSB. And of course, he was killed. He was killed in this city. He was poisoned with Novichok. What can that mean for the people of this country? And here's the really interesting part in the assassination of Litvinenko. He was not the only one poisoned. The waiters working in the restaurant, in the pub, in which he was having some tea, they got poisoning also. My friends, Russia does not try to just kill the people that they hate without hurting anyone else. Russia carpet bombs everyone. When they have the power to do as such, they destroy everything they touch. That is how they function. That is always how they function. And now, as usual, Russia does its worst whilst expecting the rest of the world to simply ignore what they are doing and to simply move on, business as usual. You know, there's some good news that came out today, my friends. Apparently, $1 is now around 111 rubles. That's good. But I think we can reach 200. That would be amazing. When $1 is 200 rubles, when $1 is 1,000 rubles, then we can throw some proper fireworks. But of course, does that mean that Putin is going to stop the war now because $1 is 111 rubles? No. Putin will not stop the war because of that. Putin will only stop this war when the rest of the world starts playing around with him. When the rest of the world stops being stupid and tells Putin in his face what he has done. When the rest of the world stops thinking about all those consequences of breaking relations with Russia. My friends, who cares about Russia? We should not care about what happens in their country. But of course we should care about what they do. Because they're doing things to us. They're doing things to you. They're trying to spread misinformation all over the place. The Russians have been proven to be involved in the spread of misinformation that led to the UK riots that happened a few months ago. Misinformation that gullible people believed and went on the streets and caused millions of pounds of damages. That's the power of Russian misinformation. And the people who think that Russia has nothing to do with them. You might think that Russia is neutral to you, but Russia most certainly does not think of itself as neutral. It sees you as an enemy. And so should you see them. Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі! Ворогам України тричі! And now, my friends, we will have a short musical break.
Допадаю наші старі, а підготувалися щако до них, але вчиться вірити в пісні. Третя осінь війни, лише падає знов, та не падає дух, бо у серці любов, і вогняний шквал, і ракетну грозу. Ми тримаємо стрій, не здамо дорогу, нам не страшно йти, і холодні дощі, поєднає нас віра у кращі часи. Ми як корінь сни, що має світ, Україна це ми, нескорений граніт. Вулиці затихли, літари засають, в темних вікнах свічі тихо догорають, в серцях незгасно полум'я горить, кожен день як подвиг, кожна мить як щит. Третя осінь війни, лише падає знов, та не падає дух, бо в серці любов, і вогняний шквал, і ракетну грозу. Ми тримаємо стрій, не здамо дорогу, нам не страшно йти, і холодні дощі. У кращі часи, ми як корінь сни, ми тримаємо стрій, Україна це ми, нескорений граніт.
Ой, які диви, красиві.
Щодня новини, після завтра, курва грошей, дома життя. Та ми не славні, мов громнясі сталі, єднані силами скорені стали. Третя осінь війни, лише падає знов, та не падає дух.
Support Ukraine!
Любов, та крізь вогняний шквал, ракетну грозу. Ми тримаємо стрій, не здамо дорогу, нам не страшно йти, і холодні дощі, поєднає нас віра у кращі часи. Ми як корінь сни, що тримає весь світ, Україна це ми, нескорений граніт.
Stay with Ukraine!
Граніт, багряне сонце, то не хмара грозових, та буча світить війни нових. Ми як любить стоїть в бурі ті, міцніше з кожним днем поскоті. Третя осінь війни,
Support Ukraine!
та не падає дух, бо у серці любов, такий вогняний шквал, і ракетну грозу. Ми тримаємо стрій, не здамо дорогу, нам не страшно йти, і холодні дощі, поєднає нас віра у кращі часи. Ми як корінь сни, що тримає весь світ, Україна це ми, нескорений граніт.
Це ж запросили цей Суки виграли по параді, вже грали в Ледяне озеро.
Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі! Ворогам України тричі! 27th November 2024, Russian drone attack alert at air bases in UK. I mean, must I say any more? Must I read the whole article, my friends? Russian drones are being sighted around the UK nowadays. Can there really be a question that Russia is an enemy to this country? That Russia is an enemy to these people? To the people of this great country of Great Britain? My friends, Great Britain opposed Nazi Germany. Great Britain opposed the Soviet Union. And Great Britain opposes the Russian terrorist regime. Why might that be? I believe one of the main reasons is the British values. They just cannot live together in the same world as a genocidal and psychopathic regime like Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, or modern day Russia. It's just not feasible. Perhaps I will come back to this in a second. But there's an interesting article here. It says no troops to Ukraine. A former commander of the UK's armed forces warned British soldiers should not be drafted into any post-conflict peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Lord Richards, previously chief of the defense staff, insisted as our troops belong to NATO and could not police any territory close to Russian soil due to Kremlin sensitivities. Now, I believe I will end there. Kremlin sensitivities. What an interesting way of putting it. The poor Kremlin, those poor snowflakes, they're so sensitive, you know? They're so sensitive. When the Kremlin does a so-called military drill at the borders of Ukraine, they call out the West and say Western propaganda when the West says that they're preparing for an attack. A few days later, they stage a large-scale attack on Ukraine. But of course, the Kremlin is just so sensitive. When the West sends Ukraine long-range missiles, the Kremlin cries. It says, "What have we done to you?" Well, it's very easy to say what they have done to this country. They have sponsored a whole bunch of acts of arson in this country, my friends. They have attempted to assassinate the leader as a partner. It does not see the West as a neutral enemy. It sees the West as an enemy. And you know what? When you are stuck in the same room as an individual who absolutely despises you and is willing and able to do any kind of low blow against you just to kill you, you can simply not keep up the mentality of, oh, you know, peace. I need to be friends with him. I need to shake hands with him. I need to do diplomacy with him. It cannot be possible. It cannot be done. You cannot negotiate with someone who's coming to kill you when that is their one and only demand. They want your demise. And they will fight for that if Ukraine falls. Now let's speak about that grim possibility. Unlikely as it may be, it is possible that Putin gets it his way and takes over Ukraine. What would happen if Putin won and he took over Ukraine? It's very simple. First of all, there would be a mass extermination of anyone who opposed Putin when he invaded Ukraine. Secondly, Putin would put every single resource and every single man, woman and child who does not want to die to work for him, for his personal goals. He would enlist every man to the military, and then he's going to start a proper war against NATO. Perhaps in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, most certainly for Moldova. He will go for Moldova if he wins in Ukraine. And then, my friends, this country, Germany, France, and many other European countries will face quite a dilemma to allow Putin to continue to advance through Europe or to establish a red line at long last. Now, in the Budapest Memorandum, that red line was established at the Ukrainian borders. But of course, that red line was not respected by the Russian terrorist regime. And now, there's more red lines that are being established. My friends, it's time to see Russia as what it is. It's time to see the solutions for this problem. Every life of a Ukrainian saved today is the life of a Westerner saved tomorrow. Is it better to face Russia by helping Ukraine win now? Or is it better to allow Russia to win and then have to face Russia in a direct confrontation? Sending the youth of this country to a war that is so avoidable, a war that does not have to happen, a war that should not even happen in Ukraine. Was Ukraine allowed into NATO? But alas, my friends, we have what we have. We are facing a grim reality nowadays. But we need to wake up and see this world as it is and not as we want to see it. Not in rosy colors in which, oh, you know, you go to speak to Russia, you talk to them, they're going to be reasonable. That's exactly what Chamberlain used to say about Hitler. Oh, he's going to be reasonable. And I do love it when socialists and communists get very triggered, very upset when you compare Nazi Germany to the Soviet Union. They say, no, they're completely different. I both agree and disagree with that. They are different to an extent. In most extents, they're exactly the same. But my friends, in some regards, the Soviet Union is actually worse. They killed more people. Plus, before World War II began, you could already never leave or move places in the Soviet Union. Even in Nazi Germany, before the war began, you could just pick up your stuff and leave. You had that possibility, you had that power. But in the Soviet Union, you did not. Every single man, woman, and child became a slave when the Soviet Union took power. Every single one. Well, of course, except the ruling class, except those at the top. It's very ironic that the Soviets, the same people who claimed they were going to equalize society, were the most unequal society on earth, where a small group of people controlled everything, and everyone else controlled nothing, owned nothing, had nothing, and meant nothing to their regime. That, my friends, is how Russia sees its own people. At the moment, they have to care to an extent, not to enlist too many, not to cause too much turmoil, to keep the enlistment officers away from Moscow and St. Petersburg, to keep up this facade that everything is fine, everything is according to plan. But my friends, everything is not according to plan for the Russian terrorist regime. They are really, with a little push, the West can finally end that evil regime and bring about a new future for humanity. Ukraine chose that future when they gave up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, when they chose peace instead of power, and they paid for it very dearly. Because it seems like the world did not hold the same conviction that Ukraine held back then when the Budapest Memorandum was signed. When Ukraine gave up those nuclear weapons, the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world did not mean to keep all of those promises. However, we are grateful for the help Ukraine has received. But it needs to be said, my friends, that to beat Russia, it will be necessary to do a lot more than what has been done. It will be necessary to unequivocally call Russia as they are, a terrorist regime. And it will be necessary, above all, to give Ukraine what's necessary to win, not just survive, and to allow Ukraine to finally use those weapons as they were intended. Not in whichever way is more politically safe for the people in power in the many Western regimes right now. That is why, my friends, the solution is simple. And the solution is as follows. Fighter jets for Ukraine!
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 Air defense 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 for Ukraine!
Long-range missiles 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 for Ukraine!
Let Ukraine strike back!
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 World, wake up!
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals!
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 More sanctions on Russia!
More
Sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia!
More sanctions on Russia!
More sanctions on Russia!
More sanctions on Russia!
And now your favorite. Seize Russian assets!
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 You know, the accumulated percentage of the Russian assets has already been sent to Ukraine to an extent. So this is not a complete taboo, my friends. And it should never be a complete taboo. When a regime breaks every agreement that is signed with them, no other country must be bound by the agreements they signed with them. Russia should be kicked out of the UN. Russia should be kicked out of every organization that it's part of. That is how we deal with a rule breaker. That is how we deal with a cheater, with a deceiver who continues to lie over and over again. I've heard not too long ago a very interesting comparison, my friends, between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The Nazi will spit in your face and say you deserved it, when the Soviet will spit in your face and say the West did it. It's quite interesting, really. The Soviet Union truly was a very devious regime. They managed to convince so many people that they were the good guys. That it's absolutely insane. It's insane to think that people were trying to flee from the Soviet Union and they were being shot at the border, whilst people were trying their best to get inside of the US, inside of Europe. Why might that be, my friends? Why were people trying to flee this supposed communist paradise? Because there was no paradise, my friends. There was none. It was hell. It was hell on earth.
Працює ще.
And Russia wants to bring that hell back.
YouTube.
Once again, my friends, coming back to the so-called influencers of this world, who, when given a little bit of change, will defend any opinion that you want them to defend. Truly,
Нарізку там робиш, да?
people who sell
Зараз
themselves,
наживо,
sell
а
tongues,
потім
if you
хто хоче,
will.
то дивиться.
I'd like to mention another one of these sell tongues, or these snake oil salesmen. An individual who I actually used to like to an
А як можна
extent.
подивитися?
His name is Jordan Peterson.
Маєш інтернет?
Now this individual is seen by many as some kind of an intellectual, some kind of an intelligent person who has a lot of good things to say. But alas, that has been fully disproven.
Нічого не працює.
Jordan Peterson speaks
Я не можу.
with very expensive words, very flamboyant vocabulary. but he says nothing of import.
Я бачу.
And the true straw that broke the camel's back, that every person needs to see, is when Jordan Peterson spoke about the Holodomor. What a disrespectful, ignorant, and absolutely scumbag individual he was that time. He purposefully misspelled the Holodomor almost every single time he mentioned it. He called it the Holodomor, the Holomodor, excuse me. The Holomodor instead of the Holodomor. Imagine that. Imagine you start talking about the Holocaust and you purposely start misspelling the name as a spit in the face of the Jewish community. Imagine someone did that. Of course, their word would not be accepted as something that needs to be respected.
Інтернет маєш?
Ну да.
And the same needs to be said about Jordan Peterson, my friends.
У мене 7 гігабайт
He is a
було,
snake
іноді
oil
не
salesman,
хватало.
like many
Але я ж
others.
10 днів не користувався.
And we need to start seeing through these snake oil salesmen. We need to start seeing through the short-term hurdles
А на вулицю тепер вийшов.
in the
бачиш,
name
у
of
мене
the
нічого немає,
long-term
цього немає.
benefits.
Я чорт його знаю.
We need to start seeing
Я
through
не
that.
можу подивитися щас.
Because
Я
the
беру
cost
Wi-Fi, надо-
of helping
надо
Ukraine
Vodafone
win now
подивитися.
is absolutely
Може, правда, гігабайти,
minuscule
як це закінчили. У мене
compared
якраз
to the cost
20
that the free world will have to pay if Russia
27-ме, да?
wins,
А в мене
compared
пакет
to the
28-го.
cost
І мене іноді не хватало.
that will
Щас
come for
можна
sure
хватати. Ну, може,
if Russia
може,
takes
хватає.
over Ukraine
Я тут не
and
бачу
then keeps
Ютуба.
moving
Ютуба не бачу.
for more conquest, then, my friends, the cost will be truly extortionate. The cost of such a war will no longer be measured into billions, but in trillions. And it's not all about the money.
Добре, це ж цікаво.
The death toll will be overwhelming.
Якраз був час.
And it will not be only Ukrainians dying at that point. It will first be the Polish, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians. And after that, Germans. After that, French. After that, British. Must we wait until Russia is at the borders of this country to finally act decisively?
Так це воно в тебе вживу записує,
Is
а
it
тоді
not
воно
better
залишається на
to
якось
beat
можна поковиряти.
this great
О, це ж
foe
цікаво, це супер.
of the free world with the hands of the Ukrainians by providing them what we
Потім
need?
покажу.
Що так можна?
What they need to truly put this beast down for
Коментарі
good.
можеш написати.
Is it not a better deal for everyone? It is. However,
Так, де?
people refuse to face this argument head on. They prefer to believe
А може реби?
in some
Там ж
lazy
постійно реби.
arguments made by the Russian terrorist regime about how somehow Ukraine always belonged to them. Funny that,
Військові практично реби.
considering that they have accepted Ukraine as a sovereign country,
І там ми їдемо,
considering
я не
that
знаю, де ми
every
їдемо,
single
вони то
region of
знають.
Ukraine
Вони
has
там
voted
вже
to be part of
багато
Ukraine,
їдемо. А ми
not
з
of
хлопцем, він
Russia,
теж перший раз їхав, і я перший раз. Ми
considering
на другій машині. Ми навіть не знали,
that
куди
Russia
їхали,
actually
що. Я
started
відкриваю
a
інтернет,
war,
щоб подивитися.
throwing a
Ага,
hissy
ми
fit,
отут.
a damn
Я
tantrum,
засняв, куди їдемо.
because they
Так.
could
Ні,
not
ну, нам
have it
сказали
their
так
way.
приблизно. Але
because
це-
they did not have enough bribes to send to Ukraine to bribe its politicians as people. Because they could not compete with the influence of the West, which Ukraine wanted to join always. They could not do anything about it. So their last solution, final solution the Russians chose, was reminiscent of the final solution Hitler chose: bloodshed. That was their plan Z, the last letter of the alphabet. When all of their subversion failed, when all their lies and deceits and idiocy have failed, they proceeded, thank you very much, they proceeded to go for a full-scale war, expecting Ukraine to fall within days. Well, my friends, Ukraine still stands, but Ukraine needs that aid at long last. Ukraine needs to be able to strike the Russian terrorist regime where it hurts the most. Ukraine needs to be able to destroy the bases of the Russian military that are far away from the front line. When that happens, Russia will not be able to continue this war anymore. That, my friends, is when we will achieve peace. But peace cannot come by negotiating with those who come to kill you. Peace cannot come by giving away things you have already given away in the past. Imagine that. Imagine somebody slashes your face and says, give me £100 and I will stop slashing you.
Yes.
So you pull out the money and give it to them, right? And then they proceed to take the money and stab you. And then they say, give me £200 and I will not stab you anymore. That, my friends, is what Russia has done to Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine all the way back in 2014. Taking regions in the Donbass, taking Crimea. There were 2 Minsk agreements signed with Russia, both of which Russia has betrayed. Both of which Ukraine has signed, agreeing to give away its lands in exchange for peace. Land for peace has been tried. Land for peace has failed. And it will always fail with the Russian terrorist regime and other regimes akin to them. That, my friends, is the lesson we should have learned long ago. But alas, we find ourselves facing against people who think that this obsolete solution that never worked in the past is somehow going to work now. How does that work? I'll tell you how, my friends. Because people do not care. Some people simply don't care if the solutions they're proposing are completely and utterly idiotic. All they want is a nice little platitude. Please, I want the war to end. What a lovely platitude to say. But how are you going to make this war end? By capitulating to the demands of a psychopath. A psychopath who has betrayed agreements many times in the past. Is that truly the best solution we have to work for? Is that a mere lazy and stupid cop-out from the real problems at hand we have nowadays? The answer is obvious, my friends. We can no longer settle for Minsk Agreement number 3. We can no longer settle for Budapest memorandums and mass demilitarization in the face of Russian aggression. Demilitarization in the face of aggression is
Я не знаю,
suicide.
с какой она области, но
That has been shown by history countless times.
Контузія, там уші пробиті, голова болить, спати не можу.
I believe this is a quote
По-перше, кажу, що
by
я доказую,
one of many
Софія,
philosophers
а ти
of
звідкіля, з якої
war.
частини?
З якої частини?
By Bismarck.
Я звідси, але моя
Fools
мама з
learn
Дрогобича,
with
це
their
Львівщина.
mistakes.
Львів.
Intelligent people
Львівщина,
learn with
а
the
мій
mistakes of others.
батька з сторони, то вони з
And
Полтави.
truly, there is some truth to that
А
saying.
ти народилась тут?
Тут, так.
It is foolish to be waiting for yourself to commit
Українську
the
знаєш.
same mistakes others have in the past.
Ну,
But it
не
is double
прекрасно.
so.
Акцент
If
є,
you have committed a
запасів часу
mistake, you have
нема,
learned
але
nothing
більш-менш
with it.
ні? Може бути, так.
Is
Розмовляти.
what we are trying to warn everyone against. Against trusting the Russian terrorist regime. Against giving away
Раз, два, три,
things for
Донеччини.
free to them.
Я знаю,
Against
що він з
capitulating
Маріуполя.
to their outrageous demands. Don't follow that method.
Три. Раз, два.
Because that has failed in the past. And it will fail for the future.
Чого, не працюєш?
And the only way to end this war is to help Ukraine
працював.
win.
ну,
Слава
ну
Україні!
я що таке.
До
Україна!
старшого складу, так?
Україна!
Синяра.
Україна! Герої України тричі! Ворогам України тричі!
Смерть, смерть, смерть!
And now, my friends, we will have another short musical break.
Кажуть, що я типу там повинен працювати, виконувати техніку безпеки. Та взагалі причини немає насправді. Якось
Ти знаєш як? Три місяці попрацюєш і можуть тебе вивчити.
так.
Так.
Мене послали нахер. Ось і все.
Окей.
Так от я їм скажу, сяду.
Я повторюю, як також возмутив.
Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! Україна! Ukraine! Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's continued escalation of aggression on Ukraine, which began over 10 years ago and has intensified now for over 1,000 days since the full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, needs to be stopped. On February the 24th, Russia launched an unprovoked full-scale invasion on Ukraine, escalating the conflict that had already been going on since 2014, with the illegal annexation of Crimea, parts of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. Russia's invasion and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine is today not just an assault on Ukrainian freedom and democracy, but it's also an assault on global security. Russia is a terrorist state. 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 Russia has violated international law and caused extensive human suffering, displacement, and global economic disruption. Inaction has meant Russia has become a greater problem. Inaction has led to war crimes. The basic fact is, Russia needs to be stopped. Stop Russia, stop the war! 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 Turning a blind eye to Russia's invasion of Georgia. Turning a blind eye to Russia's electoral interference across the world. Turning a blind eye to Russia's annexation of Crimea and subsequent invasion of Luhansk and Donetsk. Things are going to get worse, not better for all of us if we don't deal with Russia. And appeasing Russia with territory leaves Ukrainians abandoned. I'm just thinking about my own situation actually. So my wife's parents are Ukrainian archaeologists. They help to run several museums across the city of Cherkasy. If Cherkasy were to be occupied by the Russians, they would be first in line, because my father-in-law has made it his life mission to understand and learn about Ukrainian history, Ukrainian culture. He's been involved in the renaming of streets across the city of Cherkasy. These streets during the Russian-Soviet occupation were given names of Russian Soviet barbarians that were responsible for the killing of many across the former Soviet Union. He made it his life mission to rediscover the old names of these streets. So if Cherkasy were to have a fall to the Russians, if it were to be occupied, you could be sure that those two, my parents-in-law, would be rounded up and they would be subjected to similar things that we saw in Bucha and Hostomel. We cannot allow this to happen. We cannot abandon these freedom-loving, democratic, democracy-loving Ukrainians. We can't allow it to happen because these war crimes will perpetuate, they will continue. We don't want this. Stop the war crimes in Ukraine! 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 Tribunals for Russian war criminals! 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 As the saying goes, no justice, no peace. And we all know how Russia operates. Its modus operandi, systematic use of war crimes in Ukraine. Russia's aggression has targeted schools, hospitals and homes across Ukraine with indiscriminate bombings of civilians. Damage to infrastructure reached £120 billion by late 2023. We're already in 2024. We're nearly in 2025, but already by the end of 2023, £120 billion worth of damage caused by Russian criminals. More than 8 million refugees across Europe, with an additional 5.1 million internally displaced persons. Russia attacks on civilians, the use of systematic torture, forced deportations, and weaponization of energy resources show a complete and utter disregard for human life. In Ukraine, Russia has gone beyond merely targeting civilians. Russia has kidnapped over 20,000 Ukrainian children, and Ukraine is still struggling to bring these children home. The true scale of devastation is difficult to quantify, but such cities as Kharkiv, Odessa, Sumy, Zaporizhia are being bombarded daily in a Russian terror campaign designed to break the Ukrainian spirit and resistance. We are saying no to appeasement. Instead, we need to give security guarantees. We need to give Ukraine and Ukrainians the ability to fully defend itself and to fully defend its people. Arm Ukraine now! 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 Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine! Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine! Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine! Russia has inflicted unprecedented levels of destruction and violence on Ukraine, breaking all existing social agreements and norms. Only unprecedented levels of military support for Ukraine can turn the tide and stop further Russian escalation and proliferation. If Ukraine is unable to defend itself, Russia, as Pavlo said before, could achieve its territorial goals of expansion, embolden further aggression in neighbouring states, and ultimately attack other European countries. There are calls, as I've said before, to appease Russia in order to seek peace. But these calls to appease Russia, these calls to appease Putin, ignore the lessons of history. Any deal that includes Ukraine surrendering parts of its sovereign territory and millions of its citizens to permanent Russian occupation are wrong. We cannot allow this. Don't appease Russia! 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 Support Ukraine, protect peace! 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 Calls to appease Putin by handing him a partial victory in Ukraine totally and utterly ignore the history, the lessons of history, and would certainly lead to more war, not less. If the experience of the 1930s taught anybody anything, it is that appeasement merely encourages dictators to go further. Like Hitler before him, Putin will not stop until he stops. Stop Putin, stop the war! 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 And as citizens, as residents of the UK, we need to keep telling the UK to do more. The UK needs to understand its responsibilities. The UK, along with the United States, promised to support Ukraine's sovereignty in signing the Budapest Memorandum in 1994. In return, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal. It's crucial, as I said, that the UK honours its international commitments to Ukraine. Another important thing, because this needs to be a multifaceted approach to stop Russia and to stop this war. Frozen Russian assets in the UK is an issue that needs to be talked about. The UK government announced in October it would be using profits from Russian frozen assets for a £2.3 billion loan to Ukraine. This is fantastic news, but it doesn't deal with the whole issue of frozen Russian assets. The government, the UK government, has still not released figures on the total valuation of Russian assets held in the UK. It's estimated that the UK holds £18 billion worth of individual assets, alongside 26 billion worth of Russian central bank assets. These need to be talked about, and the faster these Russian frozen assets are deployed to Ukraine, the better, because Ukraine needs this help. Release Russian assets for Ukraine! 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 Release Russian assets for Ukraine!
Что там они пишут?
We
Where is
also
Zelensky? What is happening? Владимир Путин лучший? Where is it?
to support
Where is this anyway?
Ukraine until victory. None of this. We will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. For as long
Ой,
as it
ё-моё.
takes for what?
Сколько
The
говна.
only way
Зачем ему дали микрофон? Бешеный. Стоит один как шизофреник. Какой другие геи Европа обязательно получает орехов по поводу. Раша Ван Лов. Да нихуя. Куска. Хату покрасил, но найдите в европейских странах. Ебаный будет ебать вас. Специальную помощь Украине прекрати. Че, молодец, учится адаптироваться. Он уже английский выучишь. Понимаешь, тяжело дома придется. Приходи на
Я пишу, что там. Ну, видишь, не до всех
Они думали, что мы где-то блять на Красную Площадь. Чего воля? Не знаю, блять, что вы делали.
Ukraine also needs more air defense. It needs more air defense systems and anti-air missiles to protect Ukraine's most valuable commodity, which is Ukrainian people.
Ну и
These
тем более у
need
тебя
to be
видео вот
protected
такого
from Russian air bombardment. Air defense for Ukraine! Air defense for Ukraine!
Defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine!
Defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine! Also,
Это если что-то
one thing
происходит,
that
они
Russia
могут
is good at
мобилизацию включить.
It's crossing red line after red line after red line. Russia has committed genocide in Ukraine. It doesn't stop there, it continues committing genocide. Russia complains what other countries are doing, but Russia employs North Korean soldiers, Iranian missiles, Chinese technology, but it seems determined to not allow Ukraine to fight back. Britain, France, Germany, the United States have got to see through this Russian rhetoric because Ukraine is allowed to defend itself and must be allowed to defend itself. Ukraine must always be allowed to strike back to defend itself. Let Ukraine strike back! Let Ukraine strike back! Let Ukraine strike back! Let Ukraine strike back! As I was saying before, frozen Russian assets are key to Ukraine taking back its sovereign territory. The UK must lead the global effort to use frozen Russian assets to fund weapons and ammunition and to finance Ukraine's reconstruction now, not after the war. We shouldn't be waiting until after the war. So that Ukraine can needs to rebuild now and lead to civilians. The UK must also produce figures on the amount of state Russian assets frozen in the UK. Transparency is the key. If we're serious about supporting Ukraine, we need to be serious about the transparency on Russian frozen assets. Another key thing to this, nearly 3 years ago, Roman Abramovich sold Chelsea FC. £2.5 billion was collected in 2022. This was promised to victims, Ukrainian victims of Russia's genocidal war. This 2.5 billion has still not been sent to Ukraine. That needs to be sent to Ukraine now. Ukraine needs that money now. The UK must also play a key role in strengthening support for international tribunals, investigating Russian war crimes and crimes against humanity. And finally, I'll end on this because I know we're cold. The lessons of genuine appeasement
У нас сюда и вообще редко приходит.
are still taught in British schools. This in Ukraine is military aggression and war in Eastern Europe, launched by a dictator Putin, betting the Western democracy's value, their comfort more than the risk of confrontation. The parallels are almost identical. If there ever was a time when British officials would be well served by learning from their own history, that time is now. Support Ukraine now! Support Ukraine now! Support Ukraine now! Support Ukraine now! Arm Ukraine now!
Когда-то приходил я с вами. Старшего хочу сюда позвать. Вначале ходил,
Long range missiles for Ukraine!
поддерживает на диване.
Long-range
Страна
missiles
подключается
for
сюда.
Ukraine.
Миша переслал.
Long-range missiles for Ukraine. Fighter jets for Ukraine. Fighter jets for Ukraine. Fighter jets for Ukraine. Fighter jets for Ukraine.
В прошлом году, когда
And finally, thank you everybody for
А я знаю, кто конкретно давал вот этого бутерброда, чай, это украинский ресторан «Мойсей» на Станском. Я там был, просто знаю, это западный Лондон, 5-я зона. Далеко отсюда.
помнишь, для кого там зима ресторан?
Да, зимой ресторан знаю.
Хозяин, повар.
Я слышал, зимой. Все зимы.
And they need to know that we
Ну, мы как раз были на протесте в Томагавке,
and we will support them until the victory. Slava
начал на
Ukraini!
ВСУ, я это слышал.
Slava Nazis! Ukraina! 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 Nasz heroin krzyczy! Slava! 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 Thank you.
И какой-то еще известный ресторатор, блядь, забыл фамилию.
Чичваркин есть.
Чичваркин, блядь, Евгений Чичваркин, точно.
Ну, у него не ресторан, у него винный магазин.
Винный магазин.
А я сфоткался с ним, брат. Он это открывал.
Интересно, где его вообще можно найти?
Он ходит на эти русские протесты.
А я его почему-то опять не видел. Может, я его просто не
Ходорковский был.
узнал.
Знаешь, Ходорковский?
Ходорковский. Да, блин,
Или
я
нет?
слышал что-то, но
Тоже был.
мне бы больше так изучить их всех.
Новая почта, когда открывалась в центре, знаешь?
Так это он спонсировал в итоге.
И он приходил туда с папой такой. Все фоткались.
Возможно, что не без того, что где-то он спонсировал.
Он не такой замкнутый, знаешь, он там не прячется. Он приходит, все.
О, ну,
We will always accept whatever they say. We will not agree with them sometimes.
а он жив вообще? Или что-то с ним произошло?
Жив, жив.
А,
Там на борзе.
это Зимин.
If the first step to the loss of humanity
52 года.
because it does not allow you to interact with others. And humans are social beings after all. They need that interaction. My friends, before we end this rally, I think it's very important for us to remember the people who have died and the people who have suffered in this conflict. Because behind every single one of those numbers of casualties in Ukraine, there's a real person, a real human being. And that's why, my friends, I'd like to ask you all to do a minute of silence. Дякую. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Ворогам України тричі!
Смерть! Смерть! Смерть!
My friends, I'd like to remind you all that our rallies happen here on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, on Fridays at 6 o'clock, and on Sundays at 3 o'clock. please come here and show your support. It's unbelievably important that you do. As we said before many times, all together, we will win. That saying is no mere platitude or boast. That saying is reality. I remember this very well, this fable in history. When Spartacus was approached by some of his generals who were making perhaps the largest slave rebellion in the Roman Empire through their history, they wanted to separate from his main army. They wanted to go in their different directions. They wanted to go back to their lands. Spartacus picked up an arrow and he broke it in front of them. Then he picked up 2 arrows. He broke the 2 arrows together.
Родители из
Then
Гомера.
Spartacus took a whole bunch of arrows together. And he gave them to his strongest general. And he could not break those arrows. He could no longer do it. Why is that? Why is it that you can break 100 arrows one by one, but when they are together, you cannot ever hope to break them? Because that, my friends, is the reality of this world. Together, we stand strong, but divided, fooled, confused by the Russian terrorist regime, we will be easy prey for them. As mentioned many times in the past, Russia can win a 1 versus 1 war against any European country. But against even 2 large European powers, they stand no chance. Let that be the message for the future generations to come. That evil regimes like Russia need to be put down when possible. And now it is possible. For the future to be better. For the future to be more peaceful. Psychopaths cannot have their way. That is our message today, man.
По работе и по рутине за
That is our
камерой всегда,
message
поэтому я не люблю быть
always.
перед ней.
And now, we're going to end this rally, as we always do, with the Ukrainian anthem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my friends.
Не вмерла України ні слава, ні воля. Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Ворогам України тричі!
Смерть! Смерть! Смерть!
Дякую.
Кіно показують, да? Ну, я все. Ні, ну я ж я мене було писати.
Все не причесане.
Ні, я ж
Буде інтернет, я покажу свій.
я налажу. Я задоволений, я був брав, я задоволений подивився.
Окей.